Well, good morning and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith and it's a joy to welcome you today. And if you're watching via video or you've been on our website, then thanks for listening in to this really important topic today. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have Justin Humphreys with us from Thirtyone and the CEO and your head of development and safeguarding. Mate, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
That's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Gavin.
It's great. Justin, I'm keen. We've got a bunch of people listening to the podcast who are from churches, working in the background, church administrators, operations directors, trustees. And so really, really important to connect with a service like yourselves, and safeguarding is, it's moved up the agenda so much for churches. And I know lots of people are doing lots of things. So we want to cover that topic today and sort of encourage people in it and advise people. And I guess signpost people into different resources that are available to strengthen them. So, Justin, before we kick off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement in Thirtyone, and because you've been a pastor before, so you've got so much helpful context, which is going to be great for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm married. I have 3 adult children now, which is very scary. Don't quite feel old enough, but that's what it is. I have been a Christian since my early teens. I was brought up in a Christian family, so always been a part of a church family somewhere. I guess my career or my vocation, my calling, has really been shaped out of a whole range of different experiences, circumstances in life, combined with a really clear call back in my early 20s to be a part of this voice for the voiceless. So I found myself early on in a career in social work with children and families, worked in local authority settings for some years, then moved into voluntary sector, worked with Action for Children, and then 12 years ago, joined what was at the time CCPAS, the Church's Child Protection Advisory Service, latterly known, of course, as 318. And through that also, being involved directly in leading youth work activities, and then becoming an assistant pastor in a thriving city church context for a period of time. So yeah, you're right. I've been there. I've seen some of it. I know the stresses, the strains, the challenges of what it is to be in local church ministry. So yeah, I mean, grateful for all of that.
Yeah, that's great. It's so helpful to have that kind of church background as well. You've lived in it, haven't you? And the conversations that happen in the background, and the training, and all the things that we want to cover today. Tell us a little bit about the service then. So if someone's not heard of Thirtyone, tell us a bit about your involvement in it, what they do as a service to churches and the wider kind of Christian community, really, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, perhaps really important to say, 318 is a Christian charity.
Yeah.
We, as our name suggests, 318 is actually taken from Proverbs 31 verse 8, which says, speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. So that underpins everything that we do and everything that we are, fundamentally. So as a charity, we're a membership-based organization. So we're working with in excess of 10,000 organizations. Probably, I'd say 60% of those churches. The remaining 40% are charities, often connected, closely associated with churches. Yeah. And we provide a range of support to those settings to help them create and maintain safer environments. So our mission is to encourage, empower, and equip those settings. So whatever safer places looks like for those different settings, our job, our mission in a sense is to get alongside and to support that effort. So whether that's through the training that we provide, and we've provided training to, we do provide training to literally thousands of people every year. Whether it is our helpline, which is an open, freely accessible helpline to anybody to call, whether it's our DBS service, which many will know, we are the largest DBS umbrella service serving the faith sector as it's described by the Disclosure and Barring Service, or things like our consultancy work, which enables us to get alongside churches, charities, NGOs, to work with some of the more complex issues. So things like audit and review, risk assessments, that sort of thing. And then latterly, being involved in research activity and parliamentary engagement, trying to be at the forefront of representing the church and the Christian community more broadly in terms of its opportunities to work in a safeguarding environment, and also some of the challenges around that. So really broad, really exciting, and really necessary. And I guess the one thing that I would probably say, Gavin, is that people's initial thought might be, "Oh my goodness, safeguarding! What a dreadful or challenging thing to be doing." Always looking at the dark side of stuff, and when the wheel comes off, and responding to crises. And there is an element of that, but actually, equally, working with churches to create the environments which are safer, which are healthier, which do contribute towards the growth and flourishing of all people, is just such a tremendous privilege.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? Yeah, I think when I try and engage our church in the topic of safeguarding, everyone kind of slumps in their chair and thinks, "Oh no, do I have to attend this training once a year?" And we've always tried to encourage people and say, you have to connect something like a safeguarding policy to the gospel. Churches love the gospel. We're about the gospel. And if you want to reach the next generation with the gospel, if you want to reach those who are far away, marginalized, then the gospel is necessary, and this policy is necessary, and that's the means in how you can share the gospel in a safe environment. So it's kind of just reordering those, isn't it, and making those connections to the practical, to the gospel, and saying, see this as important. And I think that motivates people. We found that motivate people to say, actually, this isn't just ticking the boxes. There's so much more going on here.
You're so right, Gavin. And I think, the more we are getting alongside churches and Christian organizations, that is the case. We're in conversation around, safeguarding. Okay, maybe the language that we use today, it may be the in terminology, next year it may be something else. But fundamentally, the principle and the mandate for us all as gospel focused Christians is that we are about caring for people, that we are about sharing the love of Christ with people. So safeguarding is not an add-on, it's an absolutely integral, fundamental part of the outworking of our faith. And for some people that's a light bulb moment, and for other people it's well, no, of course it is.
And it's going to be mixed across the board, isn't it? And how people deal with it locally at churches. No, it's good. Tell us a little bit about, you're working with 10,000 different organizations, 60% of churches, which is great. Have you seen churches accelerate to be doing more and more and getting on board with this? Is that a trend that you've seen over the last 10 years?
Yeah, very much so. The landscape for church has changed almost beyond recognition, hasn't it, in this 10-year period? And I think particularly having gone through periods of extended lockdown and restrictions as a result of COVID-19 has forced the church to almost reinvent the way that it engages with community. And I think that particularly has brought some new challenges to us all, actually.
Yeah.
So, the advent of online hybrid ways of doing church have meant that we've had to think more carefully around, well, okay, how do we create that as a safer environment for people to engage? How do we avoid, or do our best to avoid, losing sight of people, particularly those who might have particular vulnerabilities, but frankly, for all people. Yeah. So, over the last 10 years, and maybe accelerated by recent events, there has been a real shift. And I think that there's probably a whole variety of reasons for that. So some of it is about people acknowledging what we've just said, which is actually this is part and parcel of who we are and what we do. And part of it is actually about the fact that there has been greater attention, I think, given to the subject, to abuse and to harm, and to how actually no section of society is immune or separated from it. And the reality that these things can and do happen in the context of church, I think has meant that people have had to think about it more seriously and more carefully. So we've seen huge change.
Yeah, no, it really has. And one of the conversations we started off here with our safeguarding thing, coming back from the pandemic, is actually that the people that you thought you needed to safeguard may have changed as people come out of it. So people are experiencing mental health challenges in new ways that you would never have expected them to be dealing with now. And that does put some people in the vulnerable category, which means that we have to reassess how we care for people when they come on Sunday and in the midweek. And you're right. So all of these things are going on for churches and leaders, aren't they?
They really are. And I think, particularly for your audience on this podcast, thinking through what that means, constantly keeping on our toes around those key issues is part of what we try to do at 31.8, to be that place of support that means that actually you're not on your own. That there are people that are able to walk alongside you to help you think through some of those things, to operationalize some of those new things that you might be doing in church. But I think one of the things that we're finding increasingly that overlays much of what we do is that whilst we have to be attentive to those people who might seem obviously to us to be vulnerable, actually one of the things that this pandemic has done, I think, has brought to mind that actually we all can be vulnerable at different points. And actually that there's a sense in which sometimes using the terminology of vulnerable or vulnerability doesn't always help us, because it means that we sometimes forget that we all have diminished capacity at different stages in life. Vulnerability can be long-term and enduring, but it can also be transient, caused by just the stresses and the strains of everyday life. So what does that mean for us in terms of how we create safer places for people?
No, that's exactly right. Excellent. In terms of advice for churches coming out of the pandemic, I guess encouraging people to review their policies and practices. Have you guys had much thinking on how to encourage churches to do that and advise churches to do that?
I think firstly what I'd probably say is that policies and procedures and training and what we'd call vetting and checking, on safer recruitment, onboarding processes, they're all really important factors that we have to be attentive to. But the extent to which they are successful in helping us to achieve safer environments is very much dependent on the cultures that we create. So we talk a lot about The culture hopefully being the fertile ground within which we plant those things, the policy, the procedure. It's important that we have them, that people understand, that they know that they're there and that they understand what they mean in terms of their outworking. But also that we know that the culture that we've created is itself focused towards what's safe, what's healthy, what encourages growth and flourishing. Because actually, if the cultures aren't what we need them to be, or what sometimes sadly we suspect them to be and discover they're not actually after the event, then we've got a bit of a disconnect. So what we are saying currently is, yes, spend time reviewing those, focusing those down, honing them to adapt to how we see church operating now. But don't forget that actually there's a wider piece for us all to do as leaders in church context, to think about what the culture is. So how are we communicating the messages of safer places? Is it something which we are regularly doing? Is there visibility around that? Are we bringing that into our sermons, our addresses? You know, what it actually means to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and what that looks like when we model ourselves on him. Yeah. How are we listening to people that have all sorts of experiences, some good, some not so good, and some just dreadfully bad? Yeah. And how are we integrating that into thinking about the ways that we do things, and how we outwork that in policy and procedure, and a whole range of other stuff, you know, going through to things like, you know, what our structures are they fit for purpose? Do they actually serve the mission and the ministry rather than serving the people who set them up? Are the power dynamics that are inherent in every setting monitored and managed in a way that actually empowers everybody else, rather than necessarily potentially creating unhelpful power imbalances? You know, so there's a whole range of stuff that we would say is part of culture that underpins the policy and the procedure piece.
Yeah, the culture conversation is so important, isn't it? Because you've got so many different partners in that as well. I mean, you've got trustees who are operating at, you know, maybe a policy level. You might have ministry leaders who, you know, will interact with it, but it's not at the forefront of what they're thinking about every time. You've got church administrators who are helping in the application of it, and you know, communicating it to volunteers, and ensuring that, you know, those procedures are followed. So you've got all these different people, haven't you, to try and all participate in building the kind of culture that creates that safe place. And that is the hard and frustrating part of, you know, can be for different people within that organization, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we will always say in safeguarding terms, if you feel like you're on your own trying to land and embed some of this stuff, or deal with difficult stuff, then actually something's gone wrong, because this really is a team effort. And as you've really pointed out well, we all might have a slightly different role to play in it, but they're all equally important to making sure that the culture and the environment is what we hope it to be.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. And one of the things I noticed on your website, which just one first signpost, is that you offer some training for trustees on what is their responsibility. And I think that's a great place to start, isn't it, in terms of review, getting our trustees talking about this, getting our trustees reviewing our policies. Is everyone happy with what we have in place? And I guess we'd encourage listeners to you know, maybe make those first steps of just a review, just a conversation. Let's get it on the agenda again as we kind of regather back together after the pandemic. So
absolutely. And you know, I think having safeguarding maybe as a standing item on trustee board meetings, you know, having actually designated a trustee who might take a lead on the area of safeguarding or safer places generally. That's not to say that person would carry sole responsibility, but it might be that person's role to say, in any conversation at a board or governance level, have we actually fully thought through the safeguarding implications of what we're proposing? You know, that kind of scenario. That is so important. and we would encourage all settings to adopt that as a model, to make sure that it becomes part of the way that we live and breathe. It becomes part of our DNA rather than just a bit of a tick box bureaucratic kind of, we do it because we've got to.
Absolutely, totally agree. It's really useful. And so if you're a trustee listening to this, please excuse me, please check out the 318 website and look at some of those things. And one of the things that we've benefited from as a church from your service has been the model policy stuff. So you might get it on the agenda for the trustees, but what policies can you use, and sharing policies across organizations, but actually to become a member of yourselves, to be able to access up-to-date policies. You offer that, and that is superb, and we are grateful for all that you guys do on that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we, as I said right at the beginning, we are a member-based, member-focused organisation. So our core offer is around that membership piece. Being a part of a larger community of people who hopefully are seeking to create safer places. And part of that is about how we equip you. So the policy templates, the guidance documents that we make available, the updates on, I don't know, whether it might be law or good practice or whatever it is that we will push out to all our members to say, just so that this is how the landscape's changing. These are some of the things that you might want to think about. So even thinking about, how we've sought to assist and guide churches to respond through the COVID-19 pandemic, through to even more recently, how we might as churches seek to respond safely to the refugee crisis with, the Syrian refugees, the Afghan refugees, the Hong Kongers arriving, and latterly the Ukrainian refugees. Isn't this where the church ought to be? And if this is where the church is, then our job is to do our very best to help you engage in that context. So the policy templates, the guidance, that's all part and parcel of what we would provide to all our members.
And the membership fee is, it's just appropriate. It's affordable. It's so important, and I would recommend everyone. And we've hugely benefited from it. And the stuff that we're talking about here is the culture, being proactive, having the policies, having teams of people that are thinking about this. But you referenced earlier about the telephone helpline, and we've called it a number of times. And when you hit a crisis, and you do suddenly feel like you're on your own, because everyone is scared about the responsibility, the response, what to say, how to say it, and the crisis stuff that you guys offer on the helpline, and then the consultancy, the experts that are behind the scenes, is so important, isn't it? And what you guys are doing, that is really serving churches, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And we are so blessed to have such a great team that provide that service. So all our team, come with a combination of professional experience in some safeguarding field. Many of them are active in that space also within their own local churches. So again, they get it. And they are such a dedicated, passionate and committed team. Because we know what it's like to be faced with these situations, and I think fortunately for most of us, it's not every day that we're faced with these sorts of challenges. So when they come, we fully understand that can be nerve-wracking, that, we just want to do our very best. So just having somebody that you can pick up the phone to and speak with, to say, look, this is what we've got kicking off. We think this is how we ought to deal with it. What do you think? What would you say that we should do? And many of the calls that we receive, and we receive hundreds every week, are from people who do have a sense of what they need to do, which is great, because that says to us, actually, you do have a sense of your policy, your procedure, and what it looks like to create a safer environment. But you just want the confidence of speaking with someone else to confirm for you that what you're thinking is right.
And that's so helpful, isn't it? That confidence is so right. And for many who are listening to the podcast who are serving behind the scenes, they are assisting trustees in some of the next stage decisions, and to be able to give advice that's sought after from yourselves, that goes, this is we're all in agreement, this is the best way to go ahead. And there's just wisdom, isn't there, from outside and from within. And you're right, it just enables the process. But the people behind the process benefit hugely from it, don't they? We know of people where mistakes have been made, or the wrong information's been given, or there's a sense of judgment. It could, loads of different things here. But to have that collective, to have that voice, to be able to stop and go, let's ring 318, let's get their perspective. And it's almost instant. It's available straight away. You guys will come back if you need to with advice, and it's great.
And we know how important it is also after the call is made, for trustees, for leaders, for workers at the front face of it, to have a record of that conversation. So what we will do for those that call the helpline is we will create a record on our secure system that identifies what it was that you called about. And then we will also record what our advice was, and that then gets securely sent to you. So you have that as a permanent record. So I think some of these situations, sadly, that we deal with, they are complicated, they are complex, they involve people in a variety of different ways. So it's really important, isn't it, that we have the confidence, let's say in a week or a month or even 6 months time, of being able to go back to that and say, just refresh our memories. Okay, what was it that we said, and what was the advice that was received? Because actually in the cut and thrust of some of the most difficult situations, memory fades. So we know how important that is.
Great. No, that's so helpful. And a couple of practical things, and on your DBS checks, and we use that, and it's great. And I know that you've not passed on some of the costs this year of all of these things, and for churches that's great and helpful. What's the advice for how often somebody should be checked in a kind of voluntary capacity that's working with children and young people? I've known some trustees say 5 years is fine, 3 years is fine. And there's different people that pull these numbers out of the hat, and there isn't necessarily some legal advice on it. What are you guys recommending for a very practical thing like that for a church?
Okay, well, I mean, firstly, to say you're absolutely right, Gavin, that there is nothing enshrined in law around that. So a good practice, in our view, is that DBS checks should be reviewed on a 3-yearly cycle. You're right, and some will operate to 5 years. Our view is that 3 really is where we should pitch it. And the reason that we say that is because the world moves on so quickly. So not only do the expectations that we might have of different team members change, the ways in which we deliver different forms of support and ministry, they change as well. And frankly, a DBS check is only essentially valid the day it's issued. It says on this day in time, the criminal record says this.
It's a snapshot, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that is all it is, which is why I think it's important to remember that DBS is part of a broader, safer recruitment process. And the other elements are of equal importance. But going back to the DBS refresh, 3 years, really, we kind of think beyond that, you're inviting unnecessary risk, actually. So that's what we would suggest. And of course, That's not to say that if somebody moves from one role to another, and the role that they've moved to is sufficiently different from the one they've come from, that in itself shouldn't trigger the need for a DBS check. So let's say a person moves from a ministry role focused on children and young people, and they move towards providing, some kind of pastoral care to older people.
Yeah.
That's a completely different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
So that in itself should trigger a new check if indeed the role that they're moving to meets eligibility for that. And again, our team, so our disclosure helpline, which is separate to our safeguarding helpline, they are always there to help answer those questions. Is eligibility met? What's the best way for us to go about doing this? Should we seek another check in this scenario that we're looking at? That's what they're there for. So, make use of them.
Make use of that as well. Yeah, absolutely right. And the recruitment side of volunteers is something that churches do a lot, isn't it? And DBS, as we're talking, is just one element of it. And some people will tie, the ability to serve in a church to a membership. And I think the more churches I've spoken to, there seems to be less emphasis on members only serving, and there is a wider door open for people to get involved. So I feel like there's a bit of change there, and I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that and how churches should think through those issues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're seeing that shift too. That actually belonging. We talk often about belonging, don't we? And how that links to believing and becoming and all of that.
Yeah.
The extent to which we have our doors open to everyone, because of course we want everyone to experience the love of God and to be part of something which sees that living and breathing every day. If then we're going to be asking those people to, or even considering those people being active in certain roles, we may be in a situation where, because those people maybe aren't members, as we might have seen it back in time, that we do need to think carefully. Well, okay, how long have these people been around? What do we know about them? And what is their motivation to be active in their service within the context of church? So all of those things do have to be thought about carefully. And we would, as a general rule, we would suggest, however you operate, whether you have a membership or not, you really need to afford yourself time to get to know people a little bit. So, 6 months in, to get a sense of where they feel they fit, where they feel they might be active or can contribute, where might they bring their skills, knowledge and experience, but also what's your sense of them? It's again about not wanting to invite unnecessary risk. And I think the reality is that whilst the vast majority of people are well-intentioned and motivated for all the right reasons, there is a minority who aren't. And therefore we must bear that in mind. So the way that I've described this more recently is that we operate with a sense of compassionate curiosity.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, isn't it? Yeah.
So we're not looking under every stone around every corner for someone who may be intent on causing harm to people, but we are open to the possibility that those people do exist and that we may find them in the context of our church. So what do we need to do about that?
Yeah, that's really helpful, isn't it? And even not having necessarily a membership, but having an application form, having an informal interview, talking about people's gifting and where they'd like to serve the church, where they feel like God's equipped them to do that. All these conversations add to that confidence, doesn't it? To reducing the risk of putting somebody into a role. And then being able to go and review that role as well, and review it with the person and support.
Definitely, and I think often we kind of take job descriptions and interviews, and really not sure about how that really fits with church or our church. but actually it's in these kind of contexts that they really come into their own. So, job descriptions, as a framework, they need to be appropriate for the context.
Yeah.
Interviews need to be appropriate for the context. It could
Yeah.
range, an interview could range, from anything from a relatively light touch, casual discussion over a coffee to a full on, across the table type interview, depending on the role and all the rest of it. But if going back to job descriptions for a moment, if you don't at least have something that you can give to people that says, this is what we believe the role, the task or the job is, how do we know whether people are capable of fulfilling it? How do they know whether they're capable of fulfilling our expectations? It's kind of fairly basic, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. Some role description and some support to do it is so important. Yeah, really, really helpful. Let me fire another question at you. After church is fellowship time. Kids are running around. Even in our church, I think people are a little bit naive to the fact that they become very familiar with the building. They're not making a connection that it's an open door policy, that we live in a broken world and anyone can wander in. It probably goes back to culture, but how do we encourage churches to think about that time as safeguarding? Because often it can go into the opportunity for something to go wrong in a classroom setting for 45 minutes on a Sunday school or a youth night. There seems to be greater risk in these kind of outside hanging out times before and after service. What are your thoughts on how churches can think about that area and be better equipped and better place to serve people?
I think what I'd start off with saying is that let's not fall into the possible trap of expecting things to go wrong.
Yeah, that's good.
But let's be open to the possibility. The reality is that sometimes things do go wrong. And I think the example that you shared there is a classic one that is probably faced by the majority of churches as we understand them today. So part of it is about the way that we communicate our intentions around creating a safer place. So linked again to the policy piece that we talked about before, who needs to know that policy exists? Who needs to know that there's a commitment from trustees, leadership, and wherever else to say our intention and our desire is to create a safer environment. And here, this is what that looks like. So your role, whether you have a defined position or role, or whether you are a member, an attendee, a visitor, a parent, a carer, a young person, we all have a role to play in trying to create that safer environment. So that means that along with that compassionate curiosity, that we're all alert to the possibility, that we all do our part to make sure that the person next to us is okay, that we are attentive to not creating unnecessary holes in the net that enable those people who might be so minded to slip through. But also alongside that, what I'd say is that, creating a culture where it's okay to bring polite, respectful, constructive challenge to some of the things that we might see and hear. Say, I'm not entirely comfortable with that, or just explain to me why did you word that like that, or why did you do that in the way that you did it? I think that's all good. That's healthy. And I think that we should be giving permission to our congregations to have that level of engagement with us, so that they can truly become a part of creating and maintaining that safer place.
I think that's really helpful. It does go back to the culture question, doesn't it? And living in community and what that looks like to serve one another. Isn't it? And to see other kids, you may need to step in and help another family in the church where their child's run off, and you're aware of it, and you're going to seek to protect them and care for them. So It's good, isn't it? And I think just having churches having conversations like this enables you to think of the ways that you can improve and contribute to the culture, to making Sunday morning, or when the church gathers, that safe place together. So that's really helpful. Can I ask you a question about young people serving? And as a church, we've been working through this for the last couple of years. And initially, our trustees took a position to say, we don't want anyone under 16 serving other kids in the kind of Sunday school ministry or in other areas of the church. So we've kind of had this kind of generation that's gone through that have got to 18 and they've never really served in the church because of this potential fear of other children abusing other children, and that there was I guess a stage when that was growing, and that was maybe the awareness of that was growing. And we've been trying to readdress that and think about, actually, there's a way that we can do this. Maybe kids serving with their parents in a classroom situation. We've been trying to come up with different ways of how, maybe someone who's 15, 16, maybe it's appropriate to serve without a parent. And we've been introducing things like code of conduct and training and stuff like that. Have you got any thoughts of, or good practice that you're aware of where churches have found a really good, clear way through this whole area of young people serving children and all those areas?
Any clear way through? Just reflecting on that for a moment.
Yeah. It's not easy, is it?
No, not at all. But look, it's some of the things that you described are what we would suggest you perhaps look at. It's really important, isn't it, that we create environments which enable people to grow and to flourish in their gifting. I think back to my own situation. At a relatively young age, I was in that position. So I remember, I was given the opportunity to take on a role with young people alongside the adult leaders of that ministry area. And over a period of 2, 3, 4 years, then get to a position where, I was able then to be, fully a leader myself in those environments. So being given that space to grow, to explore in a safe way was absolutely critical to my own formation and development as a young Christian. So, and isn't that what in part church is all about?
Developing people.
So creating those opportunities is so important. But I think that the point that you make around, when is it appropriate to, let's say, fully release somebody into a leadership role? Now, look, for a whole range of reasons, the general view that we would take is that it is not reasonable or fair, and sometimes even safe, to release a person into a position of full responsibility until they are of an age where they can manage that. So we would actually say that any young person who hasn't reached the age of 18 should always be active alongside an adult leader who can take full responsibility for whatever is taking place, because it just isn't fair to place that level of responsibility on another child, and without even getting into all the nuances of relational dynamics between one young person and another and all of that, but actually coaching them, mentoring them, supporting them in that direction, because you, let's say, see a gift in someone that just needs to be fanned into flame. This is just that, the one of the many beautiful elements of what it means to be in Christian community, isn't it? But we've got to do it safely.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think it's I've met lots of churches who would take kind of easy line saying no one under 16 can serve, and that's how they manage it. It's great, but they do miss out, I think, on developing young Christians, and there's love there. And there is a way to protect the young people who are under 16 serving in a voluntary way or assisting a leader in the context of a kids ministry class, and that can happen. And
absolutely.
and some wisdom in how you apply it and how you work through it. But just to challenge church and say, rethink about this. If you've, young people, I think, we want to see them engage after the pandemic, and there's new enthusiasm, and I want to get behind that and say, how can I enable young people to feel like they're part of the community, they're contributing in a way, but at the same time, protecting them and ensuring that you, as you said, don't put on the responsibility on them that's too great and shouldn't be placed upon them. So
I think that's right. And in a multitude of different church settings, contexts, traditions, expressions, service can look quite different, can't it? So why would we not want young people to be active in service if that's what they believe is the way they want to express their emerging, growing faith? And there is an overlap, but also a distinct difference, I think, between service in many different forms and leadership / responsibility. So for me, I think that the leadership / responsibility piece requires some deeper thinking when we get to that point. How do we define that? Where are the boundaries between one and the other? And are we confident that we can actually transition a young person from one to the other safely? Yeah.
And that's got to be done on an individual basis as well, isn't it? And gifting basis as well. So that's really, really useful. And you've covered so many different parts of service. Is there anything that we've not covered that you think points church leaders or church administrators here to one of the things that you service?
There's a couple of things, perhaps, and part of this is about again communicating the broad message as far as we possibly can. And that is about so we have something called the Safer Places Pledge, which is for trustees and leaders to in a sense sign up to. And there are 6 elements within that Safer Places Pledge, which just essentially helps the church or a context to say, look, this is part and parcel of what we do here. There are ways in which we operate, which mean that we are committing to creating a safer environment here. And I think it's a really simple and easy way for a church leadership or trustee board to say to the wider congregation or people that are engaged with the things that you do, to say, this is the direction of travel for us. So I'd encourage people to perhaps jump onto our website and look for the Safer Places Pledge. So if you just drop it into the search bar, which we've improved in recent times, and it works so much better than it did before. So perhaps just put in pledge or something in it, and it will take you there. The other thing which might be helpful for some of your listeners and watchers to know about is Safeguarding Sunday.
Okay.
So Safeguarding Sunday is something which we've been involved in facilitating each year for the past 4 years. This year it's the 20th of November.
Great.
And it's an opportunity for churches of all traditions and expressions to come together, if they can, on the same day, to be committing to creating safer places, to celebrating what that means for us as church, to dig into why it's important, but also to honor and champion the people who have particular roles in that area, and to say, look, we know that this can be challenging and difficult, but we're behind you. We want to pray for you. We want to honor you for what you do. And that is another way of actually some of the feedback that we've had around the conversations that's generated in different church contexts for people in all sorts of roles and just people attending has been incredible. So last year, over 2,000 churches signed up as a part of that. Brilliant. And I'll just encourage you perhaps to think about that. Is that something you can engage in to help you embed some of these key messages?
And to have those conversations in culture. I think that sounds great. And I mean, one of the things that I often go back to on your website is that you've got these 10 standards which I think are helpful, that cover whole things of governance, culture, some of the things we've been talking about, practice. So worth going on and having a look at that, and that will help you review some of the the things in your policy, your practices, and your culture, and to think about, right, what else can we do to contribute to making this a safer place for everyone. So those are great. You've also got things like posters on your website. You've got training links. I mean, you can sign up to training straight away in different regions and different areas. So again, it's worth checking out the resources that you've got available. Have you got any, where would you pinpoint us to go to? Any particular resources that you think are helpful?
That's really difficult for me to say, because I'm going to, well, if I mention that and I don't mention that, but
someone's going to tell you off in the background. Yeah.
Look, I think perhaps just for people to head to the website, which is 318.org.
Yeah.
So 318 spelt out, no numbers.org, and just have a route around and see what you can find. Hopefully it's intuitively laid out. So you'll see the training offer, you'll see the membership offer, you'll see some of the things around DBS. But hopefully just having a bit of a route around will give you a feel for, who we are, and why this means so much to us, and hopefully you'll then get a sense of how we might be able to support you if you're not engaged or a member with us already. So, and then just pick up the phone and speak to the team, because they're a really friendly bunch.
Yeah, they are, and that's great. Yeah, and definitely, I'll put the link on the socials, and people will check that out. And I think that's great. And there's so much helpful advice and training out there with you guys. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of the churches that I know that use you guys, and it's made a huge difference. And you're right, you're able to operate with that more confidence, because you've had some advice, you've got experts, you've got people who understand the context and will be able to support you. So thanks for the difference that you guys are making. It really is superb.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much. It's great to get the feedback. I'll take it back to the team. They'll be delighted. Thank you.
It's great. And just one thing that springs to mind: if you're listening to the podcast, and as Justin and I've been chatting, you feel like you're on your own in this, and you feel like it's an uphill battle, please get in contact. We don't want people to be isolated on this issue. Please come and have a chat to the church office, have a chat to the guys at 318. Pray and ask for God to provide somebody in your church to help support you in this. And I think I've sat with some leaders and they said, we've got no one to manage this area, but God provides people for his church wonderfully, and sometimes we're just looking in the wrong area, or we haven't looked broad enough, and God's blessed us. We've got people in backgrounds of social care like yourselves, youth work, police officers, school teachers, people that deal with this kind of stuff each day. So look and gather a team around if you do feel like you're on your own, and begin those conversations. So is anything you'd add to that?
No, I just agree wholeheartedly, Gavin, with that. And just to perhaps remind your listeners and watchers, our helpline is freely open to anybody.
Yeah,
you don't have to be a member with 318. It's one of the things that we do that doesn't cost. Yeah. So, if ever there are any questions, any queries, it's not just about when things have gone wrong. It's also about, what advice have you got for us in setting this thing up, or where might we look for this, that, or the other? That's what we are there for. So please make use of us, because as you've said, if people feel that they are on their own, they're not.
Yeah.
We and others are there, so reach out. We're in it together.
That's brilliant. So helpful. So yeah, thank you guys for providing that free of charge. Mate, thank you so much for your time. It's been
Pleasure.
Lovely to chat to you and learn from you, and it's great to be able to put this on to serve our listeners, particularly in this area. So lots to follow up. Please check out our website for resources and the conversations. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Justin or others, and you'd like to get in contact with us, and please do that at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. Please check out the 318 website. It'll be on our social media, and you can look at the link. Check out their resources, check out their advice, and please sign up to become a member of their organisation. We've benefited hugely from it, and so we would recommend that to you and to all our listeners. Mate, have a wonderful rest of the week, and grateful for your time.
No problem at all. You too, Gavin. Thanks for having me on.
Bless you.